October 1st, 2019 Duval City Council meeting to order. Would you please rise for the flag salute led by Councilmember Matthew Iyer? Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great. Clerk, will you please take the roll?
Councilmember Brudnicki. Here. Councilmember Iyer. Here. Councilmember McHenry. Here. Councilmember Remington. Here. Councilmember Hoag. Here. Councilmember Napland. Here. Councilmember Langle. Here. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Under additions or corrections to the agenda, under consent, please add payroll for October 4th, 2019 in the amount of $264,118.08. Claims for October 1st, 2019 in the amount of $282,915.12. Under unfinished business, remove item number 4, AB 19-56, resolution, the Ridge at Big Rock final plat. Are there any council members that would like to speak this evening?
I have something about quick report.
Okay, so we'll get there, but
Okay.
I'm just taking the list.
That's fine. It wasn't a like
Appreciate the
report.
enthusiasm. Anyone else that would like to speak this evening? Councilmember Hoag?
Don't want to speak, but did you get to the additions or corrections?
We're working on that, so I'm taking council members that want to speak, and then the appropriate time for any additions or amendments is after that. So is there anyone else that would like to speak? Okay, moving on. Is there any other additions or corrections to the agenda? Councilmember Hoag.
I'd like to add a discussion or decision to allocate half human services grant that we've already budgeted for 2019. Under the current grant policy with potential modifications of the application timeline.
Was that under new business or unfinished business? Okay. All right, any other additions or corrections to the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. Moving on, do we have a motion to approve this evening's consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Councilmember Napland.
So I prepared myself ahead of time so I wouldn't not say this correctly. So I move to amend the council minutes for September 17th, 2019, unfinished business, item 5, approve and authorize the mayor to sign an interlocal agreement for law enforcement services between the City of Duval and the Riverview School District for 2018-19 and 2019-20 school years to add the following sentence. Council discussed and gave staff direction to work with the school district to draft an interlocal agreement for the full-time SRO position at Cedar Crest High School and also to start a conversation about future cost sharing.
Second.
Discussion? All right, seeing none, it's normally we don't add things that are separate from the item on the agenda to the minutes, but if that's what council wants to do, you can go ahead and do that. So if there's no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. Motion passes. Do we have a motion? We have a motion on the underlying agenda, consent agenda. So all those in favor of the consent agenda as amended, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say no. Motion passes. And we'll go ahead and move on comments for the audience. We did have one person signed up to speak this evening, Ms. Connie Zimmerman from DFA. Please approach the podium and introduce yourself and your address.
It's great. Good evening. I'm Connie Zimmerman. I'm here representing Duval Foundation for the Arts. I just wanted to say that we're getting to the end of the summer, buttoning up the project as far as we had anticipated, and we're so pleased to be working with the City of Duval council members and working with this upcoming agreements that we've been working through with each other. We're delighted with how things are moving along, although it has taken a little bit of time. We understand working with Laura and with Steve, it's good. We'll be looking at the parking agreement in the future, and I just wanted to say, we're getting there. Thanks very much.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak this evening? Seeing none, we'll move on to scheduled items. So under the mayor's report, yesterday we had a meeting for the Sound Cities Association Legislative Committee. Pretty much we didn't have a quorum, but we reviewed last year's agenda, which focused on transportation, affordable housing, and fiscal sustainability. The agreement from those of us that were present was really to continue to look at that. There is, everybody here has heard me talk about changing transportation planning and maybe going from a watershed type approach or sub-region approach that crosses jurisdiction borders to really look at, where traffic is coming from and where it's going to, and starting to plan and fund projects based on that. And it sounds like between that and a PSRC meeting that I was at last week, that other cities in the South are starting to come around to that concept. So it looks like we're starting to get momentum to really start to open up the conversation about transportation planning and funding to help those of us areas that are kind of stuck in between several different jurisdictions. Additionally, it sounds like there's definitely going to be some momentum to continue discussing local transportation funding and more work into what cities actually need and what our barriers are. So that's really important, especially depending on how November turns out. Cities might lose a significant source of transportation funding, as well as WashDOT and other transit agencies as well. Puget Sound Regional Council Executive Board met last week. Transportation was a topic as well. Pretty much routine business, going over what we did at the Regional Project Selection Task Force. And we had, thank you to those that were able to come to the Snoqualmie Valley Governments Association meeting last week with the Governor's Chief of Staff, David Postman. It was nice to have him there. I know Councilman Lingle and Remington were able to make it, so that was great. Talked to Mr. Postman a little bit about some of our challenges again in the city and have invited them out. We'll be working to try and get the governor out to come and see firsthand kind of what the issues are. I think we're getting closer to getting the legislature to open up GMA and start fixing the challenges that have come from good legislation and really trying to start to work on that, but it is a long process. I would expect 5 to 10 years before there's any substantive changes if the commitment stays there. I think overall that's about it. I've been getting back into the swing of getting out and about. We're working on some budget items internally with our interim finance director, going over our current expenditures, looking out at the future, and starting to get our baseline for our mid-biennium check-in. So far, there's been nothing glaring, and everything's, for the most part, seems to be on track, so that's positive news. And as soon as she's ready, we'll, of course, be bringing that stuff to council. Public Works Director Lenashevsky mentioned today our water meters. The water meters were purchased, I think, in late 17 or early 2018. Is that about right? The meters were purchased this year. Was it this year?
Yes, the meters were purchased early this year, and that's
Okay.
about 2/3 of the city's need in total meter replacement.
Yeah. So what our staff has identified is we have a lot of meters failing, and so we're getting zero reads. And that's costing us as a city about $9,000 a month without having those reads, because we still have to pay for the water. So Steve and I've talked at the administrative level, and as he mentioned in committee of the whole, we're going to be first offering overtime to folks to go out and start getting those meters replaced as quickly as possible and see how it goes. and with the goal of that definitely being a top priority, because that's a huge budget impact, not just to the water fund, but also to our general fund. So it's one of those examples of we don't have enough people to do the work during the work week, but it's stuff that has to get done. So I'm thankful that Steve and his crew are eager to test this out and see what we can get done. And I think that that's all I have for today. Actually, just one more check. Actually, it wasn't on my list, but we also have a proclamation this evening. So I was checking the agenda to make sure that we had it on here. So we have issued a proclamation for Domestic Violence Action Month, and I will go ahead and read it. Whereas domestic violence is a serious crime that affects 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men during their lifetime, and whereas domestic violence is widespread and has a devastating impact on survivors, children, families, and our community, and whereas domestic violence does not discriminate and crosses all racial, economic, gender, educational, religious, and societal barriers and is sustained by indifference, and whereas domestic violence violates an individual's privacy, dignity, security, and humanity due to the systematic use of physical, emotional, sexual, psychological, financial, and reproductive coercion, control, and/or abuse. And whereas ending the cycle of this vicious crime requires the courage of survivors and the support of the larger community. And whereas education, prevention, and intervention efforts to end the cycle of domestic violence are imperative to not only protect survivors, but also to increase public awareness of the severity and extent of domestic violence. Now therefore, I, Amy Okerlander, Mayor of the City of Duval, Washington, and on behalf of its City Council, do hereby proclaim the month of 2019, October 2019 is Domestic Violence Action Month in Duval. I urge all citizens to speak out against domestic violence and support LifeWire's efforts to prevent and end domestic abuse in our communities and increase public awareness of and action on this issue. Ending violence in the home is a national imperative that requires vigilance and dedication from every sector of our society. We must continue to stand alongside LifeWire advocates, service providers, law enforcement, and our criminal justice system as they hold offenders accountable and provide care and support to survivors. But our efforts must extend beyond the criminal justice system to include housing and economic advocacy for survivors. We must work with young people to stop violence before it starts. We must also reach out to friends and loved ones who have suffered from domestic violence, and we must tell them they're not alone. We encourage survivors, their loved ones, and concerned citizens to learn more by calling the LifeWire helpline at 425-746-1940 or by visiting lifewire.org. This October, let us honor Domestic Violence Action Month by promoting peace in our own families, homes, and communities. Let us renew our commitment to end domestic violence and its brutal and destructive effects in every city, every town, and every corner of America. And this is something that impacts, is often under the radar in communities like ours that are relatively affluent. The violence or abuse may not be physical in the form of bruises. It may be in other ways that are less obvious, but more harmful to our community. So encourage everyone to watch out for the signs and reach out to those that you think might be in a bad situation and try and get them to talk and take action when they can. So that is all I have for this evening. So moving on to council reports. Councilmember Langle.
I didn't do this last meeting, but on September the 16th, I attended the Ruckle House Foundation's presentation on the 2050, and it was very informative. There were some immediate takeaways, and I just identified four of them, but they're just one sentence each. Their report started by saying that generally stakeholders want government to work, but they want government as a partner, not a ruler. Those were their specific words, and I was surprised at the strength that they shared those words. The second thing I took away was that they said in their research and all these different community meetings across the state, there was agreement that annexation process is simply not working. And that seemed to transcend regardless of industry, type of community, small cities, big cities. They also acknowledged in their presentation that residential annexations rarely pay for themselves. What does pay is when you have a combination of commercial and residential. That's much more likely to be financially beneficial to a jurisdiction. And then the last thing that they emphasized was community planning processes, which you and I have had many conversations about that when I was a citizens, and the importance of bringing everyone, all the stakeholders together and engaging in a deliberate process. I followed through with them. I obtained the PowerPoint presentation that was given that day. I have it available for us to distribute at retreat, or, you know, whatever. But it's a very informative presentation.
Thank you. Anyone have any comments or questions for Councilmember Langle? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to council committee reports. Are there any reports from committees this evening? Councilmember Hoag.
So we have not had any finance administrative committees meetings this last 2 weeks, but we do have one coming up tomorrow at 3:30 at the police station. We will be going over a mid-biennium check, a year-to-date analysis, a budget adjustment amendments. We'll be talking about the accountant position, accountant's assistant position that we're recruiting for. And so it's open to the public. It's at the police station. Thank you.
Thank you. Administration update. Do we have one this evening? Okay.
I should communicate better with Councilmember Hoag so I don't give the same presentation, though, or the same information. So excuse me when you see my, one of my slides. I will do a better job on that. So good evening, Mayor, Council, and definitely members of our community. There we go. So this evening, it's a pretty quick update. It's been a busy couple of weeks. Last week, I was asked by the mayor to go to the SCA meeting because the SVGA meeting was here in town. So I got to see a pretty amazing presentation from our Public Lands Commissioner, Hillary Franz. She's very engaging and dynamic, and really crosses the pathway between Eastern and Western Washington. When she went into that position, they were known as Do Not Resuscitate, not DNR. And so she's made strides with Eastern Washington to be more collaborative. Her goal also is to make our public lands profitable. So she gave a lot of examples of how they're using economic development, and Eastern Washington is a really good example of turning a lot of the land into AVAs, which are for agriculture and wine industry and hops, and how much money that brings per acre. We've gone in some areas in Eastern Washington where we're yielding $2 to $3 an acre to $20,000 an acre. And so that was a really good message. They did record it, so I am gonna see if I can get that recording, because she's moving, I think, that department and that whole division in a very different way that has been done before. The revenue from a lot of those lands goes to our schools, to fund our schools, so there's a lot more money going into the school system. But there's so many great examples. She talked to us for over 90 minutes, but I wanted to say it was probably one of the best speakers I've seen of an elected official in a really long time. So we do have a finance department update. The director recruitment process continues. The first review of applications are due on 10/20. So we should get some news fairly quickly after that. Our other city administrator, Carrie Hurt, is out for a couple of days, but he has sent an email to find out kind of where we're at, how many applications we have. So we'll report that as soon as we know. We have made a request for assistance to 38 cities for essentially somebody to come in and sit in our offices for 6 hours, hopefully up to 6 hours a week, that would do senior accounting level duties.
So I just wanted to list those: bank account and reconciliation, journal entries, spreadsheets, data analysis, because we're continuing to fall behind in that task as we move forward. And so that was critical. We're also talking to the city of Snoqualmie specifically for potential help from them. They have a senior accountant that worked for the city of Duval, so they might be able to come in and assist us. And then the city of Monroe as well. So I just want to give you that update. And that leads into, we're having a Finance and Administration Committee meeting, which Councilmember Hoag already talked about, so I won't go into depth on that. But it is a pretty high-level check-in, but we do have quite a bit of information to share. That is the end of my slideshow, but Steve asked for a little bit of time to give some administrative update too in the Public Works Department, so I'm inviting him up. Say that again? Oh, do you have questions? Sorry. I was gonna go with the end.
Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Steve Laniszewski. I won't take much time. I just want to share a couple things that I think are kind of important and people may have questions about. So the paving that went on Stevens Street this week and last, the preparation for it, that is not what we do as a city, but it is part of the city's development management and the right-of-way use permit process. So over the last 18 months, staff has been working with Puget Sound Energy, and they did patches for tie-ins and repair of their own systems in our road right-of-way on Stevens between 2nd and Main Street. So those little window patches. So at one point, just so you guys know what your staff does, is they say, you know, enough is enough. 1 or 2 patches is great, but if you're gonna cut a ribbon in this whole thing, you're gonna replace the whole thing. So that is why that happened. So prorated out, since we just did, you know, our own Baton Road overlay at a per foot cost, you know, that's $138,000 value. Well, I asked our inspector actually to see if they'll share the number with us, but tons of traffic control because of the grinding on Main Street, tons of traffic control because of the paving on Main Street, and then coming up the hill. So it was a big project. And we are involved in every aspect of that, from the removal to the replacement, and then of course everything in between, coordinating with everybody, the school district. So a big project. We have went live, you guys probably haven't heard this, so maybe you remember the term ActiveOv, which is our asset management system. So water system is fully uploaded and implemented into it. We have started issuing work orders through it. So another date and time when we have a few minutes, I can pull up and show you guys what it looks like. A work order that I showed the mayor that we are working on, and you may have had some people call you with complaints about parking at Big Rock Park. Again, a victim of our own success. So everybody is of the understanding, I don't want to throw people out, you know, and just put them under the bus here, but soccer has the far field 1, football has field 2, soccer has field 3. It is rented max as council wishes, right? We want to make sure we're capturing everything we can. The big hiccup that is unbeknownst is when cheer started attending with football. So that is another 20 to 50 girls, 2nd to 5th grade. So they don't need space, they don't need field rent, but they were just there doing what they did on the side, which just adds more activity, adds more cars, adds more action in the park. So what we are doing though is we've assessed the parking facility, and to maximize maybe the use of it, because there isn't a great turnaround, there are groups of ADA stalls. We are over ADA stall parked on our site. So the 2 that are down by the skate park are staying. There's 3 that are central kind of by field 2, and then there's a couple more. We have 7 on site. We're gonna remove 1 and the stall and actually make a formalized drop-off and turnaround area, and then formalize some parallel parking, and then make sure we do not have parallel parking where that's gonna go. And then in front of the baseball field 3, which is the furthest west grass field, there's a block out for the fence where you're not supposed to park. We're gonna put a sign on that, since we don't work after 4 p.m. anyway. Hey, parking after 4, A-okay. So we're trying to add some stalls and just make sure everybody is aware of that. And then I think on top of that, if you've noticed the new signs that have gone up at like 275th and 150th, 145th and 3rd, we're working on Stevens and 2nd next. So stop signs, we've gone away from the old 4x4 posts, breakaway metal, high-res reflective, high-res posts. So it's much brighter, and we're working with a lot of the neighbors on those corners to try to improve that. And I think that was all I had. Any questions for Public Works? Yes.
Councilmember Napoli.
I just wanted to say thank you for the creative approach to Big Rock parking. It's
Right, we
that
can't make
not
more
having a
space.
turnaround is huge, and for you to figure out a way to make that happen, I think, I always wanted to drop my kid off and I couldn't, I had to park and go figure out how to get him there. So I think that will help. I mean, not completely solve the problem, but thank you very much.
And one more strange issue we're working on, we've had some complaints, and it's forever been an issue, is parking at the high school, but on the road, not in the morning, because the morning slug is going in, dropping off, and going away. It's the afternoon pickup at Cedar Crest, where if they get there and they're the 10th car, they actually wait in the drive lane. So I met with the school and, the high school. They each kind of run their own site as principals. So I met with their administration. We're going to try something. We're not sure how and when to deploy it. But as I sat there and observed, there was up to 15 cars parked in our drive lane. There are county residents who live to the east, so it isn't necessarily fair. You have another secondary school over there, which they may need service in and out. So we have that very wide asphalt on 150th before you get to Baton Road stop sign. So we're thinking of how can we make some, with what we have in-house, like some A-boards, and work with the school and sending out some messaging like, hey, parking here until 2:15, because that's when the kids get out, and then the group starts moving. So they are literally parked on the drive lane, which last time I checked, the police is not okay. So we're going to work on that. We don't want to ruffle feathers, but it's not really safe and it's not operating fairly for those who actually live past there. So we're going to try something, because everybody's like, oh, just widen it over there. I'm like, well, we got a lot of wide asphalt right over there. Can we figure out how to use it productively? So we're working with that, because they were blocking buses. People were all over the place. It was like Wild West, but nonetheless, we're trying to work with those folks too. So that is all.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Laniszewski? And thank you for the creative work and going up, and I know that I called you last week and you were upstairs, or up at the high school monitoring the traffic, checking out the situation, so that's much appreciated that you're getting out of the office and able to do those things. We don't have any presentations this evening. We do have a public hearing on the resolution for surplus items. So with that, I will open the hearing and we'll do a staff report.
Okay, good evening, council, staff, citizens, Steve Laniszewski, Public Works. We have a public hearing on our citywide surplus. Obviously, assets become out of service, past their life expectancy, and they are replaced throughout our budget and over time. So we are going through the standard process, which is extra for utilities. Surplus of items is value-based and/or utility-based. So the city has utilities here. These are all commingled funds, so we have to hold a public hearing to dispose of our assets that are purchased by the utility. So there's a couple RCWs that guide this. The list is in the packet, miles, year, and then a brief description. There are photos. The big items are 2 police retired vehicles, 2001 and 2011, 2012 Dodge Charger, 96 Chevy pickup, and a 2004 Chevy pickup out of Public Works. The 2 pickups and the vehicles were actually surplused in our budget process, and new vehicles are budgeted for replacement and actually purchased and arrived. So we tried to clean them up. Summer helpers did kind of their last ditch effort, and the last bit of their summer, a couple of them weren't drivable, so we found them tasks that they could do in a place for a few hours at a time. So they kind of detailed the cars up, cleaned them up, and they are now at the wastewater treatment plant yard. Lots of random computer parts. Hard drives are removed and/or destroyed per IT and policy. There are still functioning hard drives if you want a RAID array HD whatever box. Oh, what just happened? For your computing needs. So we try to manage what we have there at the plant, but we don't need a lot of those things. And the other part of what we do to get rid of the stuff is we don't have a lot of space either. So it's wise to keep certain things around, but we don't keep 5 of everything around. We keep a couple or one item, like a desk or a cupboard or a cabinet or whatnot that you might need soon. But if they're junk and broken, they have to go too. A quick bit of information on the budget. So there was and is a budget line for this that did not show any revenue. So the good news is we already spent money or sold items this year, which receipted $15,402 revenue. So that will go through the budget amendment process when we do the mid-buy, I think, is what Amy D. was hoping for. And then this will yield another round of funds to go into that level. The term sales of fixed assets, I had a question on that today. That is littered throughout each budget. And what that is normally used for is when we are clear and specific, and it's normally utility related. So if we have a pile of old metal from water valves, broken water pipe, broken fire hydrants that have scrap value through metal, we harvest those up till we can get a full truckload to the scrapyard. And then when that $410 comes back, that goes to the water account. Wastewater treatment plant and sewer are the same. The one thing I did notice in here is it is under fixed assets, and on the agenda bill forthcoming, the name I confirmed with Amy De Los Santos doesn't really matter, sales of fixed assets or sales of scrap and junk. Most places just have one line for selling their old stuff. So call it what you will, but we will receipt it to the sales of fixed assets in the 501 fund. So that will need to be just cleared up as we move forward. Outside of that, vehicles past their service life, a lot of the items are either broken and or past their service life and have been replaced, or we no longer have a need for them.
Thank you. We did not have anybody signed up for public comment. Is that correct, Ms. Wyckoff? Is there anyone on the audience that would like to speak to this that has not signed up yet? Right. Seeing none, we'll close the hearing, and we have it for discussion under another agenda item here. Under new business, Agenda Bill 19-69, confirm Mayor Okerlander's appointment of Rick Scherer to the Duval Cultural Commission, Position 1, a vacant 3-year term ending 12/31/20 for discussion and/or decision. And he's not here this evening, but I'll say I had a meeting with him. He's definitely very interested in volunteering and contributing, and I think he'll be a good fit for the Cultural Commission.
I move that
Anybody-
we pass AB 1969, confirm Mayor Amy Okerlander's appointment of Rick Scherer to the Duval Cultural Commission, Position 1.
Right. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. Motion passes. Moving on to Agenda Bill 19-70, contract for Epicenter Services LLC, solid waste procurement for discussion and/or decision. Ms. Wyckoff.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Jody Wyckoff, City Clerk. Kind of taking this over for our former admin, Diana. We met with Mr. Brown. He is the gentleman who presented to you a couple months back regarding solid waste contracts. Council gave direction to staff to pursue a professional services contract with him to help assist us through the RFP and procurement process. So staff met with him to briefly go over his proposed scope, and we have provided for you a draft. It's been approved through the attorney and everything, so at council's will, it can be approved. A contract with a scope of work, and I'm here to answer any questions that I can.
Does anybody have any questions? Councilmember Nackland.
This will be quick. It said in the notes that typically a city will have payments on completion of various tasks, but it is also a potential option to pay at the completion of the process. It looks like the way this is written is it would be pay as you go. There was also discussion when he was here to give the presentation that he can be reimbursed by the whoever, whatever hauler is chosen. And so is there an option to delay payment and just let that transaction happen at the signing of the contract with the hauler?
There is that option. We would need to probably go back to him to have that discussion just to confirm that he's okay with that. The reimbursement, we would still pay him.
Okay.
If there is to be some sort of reimbursement or anything along those lines, it would be between us and the hauler, not between him and the hauler.
see.
Yeah, so,
Okay.
but yes, currently the contract is set up to do progress payments based on when the tasks are completed. And then, but he did mention, and which is why I put it in the agenda bill, that sometimes city councils wish to pay in full at the end of the process. So if that is council's desire, then I will go back to him and talk to him about that and see if he is still able and willing to do that.
I guess if it doesn't impact our ability to recoup through the contract with the chosen waste service.
Yeah, I think
It
we.
maybe doesn't make
I
that
think
much
we
difference
can't
to me.
assume that that's going to happen.
Right.
I think when he was talking to us, he was saying that, that it has happened, and it can happen. But I think for your purposes, I don't think we should just automatically assume that that is how this will happen.
Okay.
So just.
Councilmember Iyer.
I'm comfortable moving forward as long as staff doesn't feel that it's going to somehow impact the budget or operations in a way that staff has identified the need to delay the payment or to request to delay the payment till the end.
I don't believe staff has identified any reason to delay or to pay. Yeah, I'll let Laura answer this one, if she can.
It would have a budget impact because we would pay for the services, so we would potentially have to do a budget amendment under this, under our budget for whatever that, I'm sorry, what was the amount?
It's 28,000. There's currently 44,750 in the line that we would use. However, I don't think that any of that was originally intended for this contract.
Yeah, but as we start to pay it, it has to go somewhere. So I want to make sure you know that it does have a budget impact and that we would have to go back and amend that. And then you would have to negotiate with whoever that hauler is to be able to recoup the cost. It's not a guarantee, it's through negotiation.
Yeah, I get that part, and thank you, I appreciate it. Like I said, what were we shooting for, the end?
I don't think the timeline's in here, but if I remember correctly, when he talked to staff, we talked about finishing it by September of 2020, because I think he's planning a retirement party for himself around there. So he's motivated to get it done by then.
Spring and summer.
Considering that the impact would all occur within the second part of the biennial budget, it would seem as though it would be, if that was achievable to get reimbursement, that it would essentially just be a cash flow issue. So I think it's fine the way it is.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, did council want to vote on this evening? And if so, I would entertain a motion.
Move that we pass AB 1970 and authorize the mayor to sign a contract with Epicenter Services LLC.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say no. Motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to Agenda Bill 19-71, Housing Bill 1923, Grant Opportunity for Discussion and/or Decision. Ms. Thomas.
So good evening, Mayor and Council. During the legislative session, Ms. Hart talked about several bills that were going through the process, and one of the bills that was approved was Senate Bill 1923. When it was originally drafted, it was supposed to apply to communities that were over 20,000. And September 5th, we were notified as a city that we were eligible to apply for grants as part of this Senate bill, which meant that all of a sudden, a lot of small cities were like, okay, we might want to take advantage of this, so we have to go to our councils. And so this is our first and only touch, really, because we don't have any opportunity to come back for this decision because the grants are due October 15th of this year, so it's a pretty quick turnaround. This bill was to work with GMA to adopt actions to increase residential building capacity and regulatory streamlining. One of the attachments that you have is from the Department of Commerce website that gives you all the different actions that you can choose from. And a city has to choose 2 of the actions that they want to move forward. They can apply for a grant to go through that process. It's a really quick turnaround. Not only would the application be due in October, but we'd have to enter contracts in November and be completely finished by April of next year. We don't typically work in that process, but we're always willing to do it if council decides that we're going to move in that direction. We did identify some actions that were that are available to us. There obviously were some concerns about our ability to do many of them. And so if you look at the document that was attached, you know, to do an infill exemption, to do a housing program, those are much larger lifts. And so I don't think we could, at a staff level, commit to that. But what we were looking at is potentially looking at a couple of actions. Probably one of the easiest ones is the short plat process. So currently, our short plat is 4 units or less. State law allows you to do 9. And then if you do the 9, that would become part of a short plat. So it would go from 4 units to 9 units. And when they're short plat, they're administratively done. They don't go through the hearing the same way a long plat does. You know, there are quite a few cities that have already taken advantage of that, but we are not one of the cities that's done that. We've also looked at, you know, how do we look at increasing housing capacity, but not increasing density? Because that's one of the things that we've heard. So what are the tools that we could look at? There is like basically they're called cluster subdivisions. So it's a way to try retain more open space and trees. And what would come with that is that you would save a larger area in that open space. But then what you would do is you would allow more flexibility in site planning, potentially average lot sizing and those types of mechanisms. And we think that that would be one thing that we could look at. We have set a policy to better protect our natural resources, which includes trees and natural areas. I think that that is it. What we're looking for is, you know, essentially a head nod from council to apply for the grant. This grant, if we get it, commits it to the actions that we choose. And that's why we didn't say, well, we'll figure it out later, or we put in too many, because we didn't want to commit to something that we didn't think we could get finished or accomplished, and that potentially the community wouldn't engage in. One of the things that is part of this bill is there's a protection mechanism, so the policies you create are not appealable. So we've not seen this, it's unusual, but it was a mechanism that the state legislature decided. In order to accommodate that, there's always things that we would have to then reprioritize within our work plan. And so I went back and I looked at our work program. So items that would get readjusted in 2020, at least until we get that completed in April, would be the sign code update, small cell policy work, and our tree protection implementation update. So I wanted to make sure that if we do something, I want to let you know what might get pushed a little bit later. I'm definitely available for questions.
Council? Councilmember Iyer and then Councilmember Langle.
So, just going through the thought process with this grant, just I got a couple questions. One, and I guess I'll ask them, and then you can answer three of them, or two of them. So, one, what would you estimate because whenever you do a grant, you have to pick a number that you're going to ask for, I assume. And so what would you assume or estimate that these grants would cover in terms of cost, efforts? And then secondly, just to be clear, this is a grant for planning activities to change the code. There's no other grant money otherwise. It's just to make the code different. But they're not proposing additional grant funding to pay for the streets that are underfunded. So is that the case?
Yes, I'll answer the first one first. So I would estimate the cost at probably about $15,000 to go through those policy updates. And we would not be doing them internally. We would use Blue Line to do that. So that's one of the things that I put in the memo, that they would probably do about 80% of the work. We would process and manage it and bring it through the process. As far as, is this a planning grant? It's absolutely a planning grant. There's not usually any money out there for planning grants, so it is unusual. It's also unusual that it's such a short time window and we find out kind of last minute about it.
Thank you. I guess my take on it would be, I'd be all for if the Department of Commerce wanted to provide grant funding for underfunded city assets that aren't funded by residential development. I think that would be a great grant to look into, increasing density to gain some more funds that could go to things that are in need, like streets. But seeing as it's just a planning grant to gain density, which I feel like we've been successful in achieving and having a diversity of density, whether it's townhouses, and I think I'm comfortable not moving forward with this grant.
So let me clarify, it's not for us, we're not picking any of the actions to increase density. So the subdivision change would only be to take it, to process it differently from it being an action from the hearing examiner decision to being an administrative decision. And then we're not increasing the density when we do cluster subdivisions, it's allowing flexibility. So I do want to make sure that it's clear that we're not adding density, we're not asking to put more ADUs out there, because that was one of the options.
You're thinking of looking at the short plat and the cluster developments, those are the two.
Yeah, those are the
Yeah,
two
and
that we identified, because I didn't feel like there would be support for doing, the duplex, triplex on every lot in the single-family zone. I thought there was some value of the ADU until you read into it, and it basically requires 2 per lot, and then I'm like, nope, that one kind of goes down. That one was out the door. I really was pretty strategic about which ones I thought we could move forward that doesn't increase density.
I read through this several times, and I've written down my words so I could be thinking it through very carefully. I believe a community planning initiative that includes all the stakeholders, including the real estate industry, is necessary for us to figure out how we're going to grow. And it pains me to say this, but I don't think this particular grant has the right structure for Duval. And a big thing, I'll just mention one thing in particular, is that you have to start implementing by April of 2020. And my fear is that when you try to compress a stakeholder-based planning process in a very small time frame, you don't really have genuine consensus, you have forced consensus. and then it falls apart later on. An example of, although longer, I think much better process was what we did with the tree ordinance. I was always very impressed with the way that was managed. I could give you a bunch of other reasons why I'm uncomfortable with this. And I do see the benefit in changing the subdivision, subdivision versus short plat. I really do. I see potential in clusters. So it is hard for me to say, I think this is the wrong match for Duval. Really is hard for me to say that. I think that council needs to have a very large and hopefully productive discussion about what kind of policies we're going to get behind to deal with our growth. And then I think we have to have a hard discussion at the council level about how much money we're willing to put to it so it's successful. So it's hard for me not to support this, but I just think their time frame, the way they've set this whole thing up, is probably not good for Duval.
I will share that message with Commerce because that's a consensus of a lot of the smaller cities that were notified fairly late. If we would have known when those bills were approved, we could have gone through a better process with our community and our council.
Yeah, and I guess I would add is, most people know that I've built at higher densities than what happens in Duval. I actually think our ADU ordinance is pretty good. It's been out, that type of ordinance has been out there for years in lots of jurisdictions. Maybe promoting that more if we really feel that's a good tool, but it's hard for me to not support this, but I just feel they've set it up in a way that won't be good for Duval.
Any other council members? Councilmember Hoag.
So I'm actually not in favor of this either, but I came at it a little different angle. When you see these, you kind of hope that it's going to be something that brings you affordable housing, and I don't know that this will do that or accomplish that. And I pulled up the bill and read through it, and I also noticed that AWC actually spoke against the bill, so I thought that was fascinating. But, and they spoke against it for those reasons too, that they didn't feel it was necessarily going to bring us affordable housing, because it's the market trends that, dictate the prices of homes. So that's my take on it. But.
Mayor Pro Tem Remington.
I couldn't get behind it. I really tried. It's like free money, go for it. But I just couldn't get behind it. When I looked through all the different possibilities, there were only a couple of them. Short platting I thought might fit Duval, but I think it was really designed for larger cities. And we did hear from our citizens recently about the North Urban Growth Area, and some folks were concerned about the fact that backyards are 10 to 15 feet and side lots are 5 feet, and where do kids play? And I think overall, in the timeline, I think we had to have our stuff in by October 15th, and things, it just didn't seem to fit and too big a push. And for our workload here in the city, maybe they'll adjust it in the future and we can find something that fits, but I don't think this is the time for us.
So we've heard from all four have reached a consensus that they don't support this. Does anyone else want to speak, or are we tabling it? Councilmember Naplin.
When you say table, you mean vote no or just not vote at all?
You can not vote at all if you would like.
Okay.
And that just makes it simple.
I mean, I'm not interested in it for many, many reasons, and so I agree with everything that's been said.
Okay, then thank you, Ms. Thomas, for researching it, bringing it forward. That is part of the job.
I know, I'm like, let's spend 10 hours on this.
Great.
Sorry, I won't complain about it.
So moving on to the added agenda item to discuss Human Services grant funding, and I will let Ms. Hoag lead this conversation since it was her idea to get the idea out there, and then we will have a normal discussion and debate.
I'm handing out, Jody helped create kind of talking point for discussion on this, but I just wanted to open it up to the council. When I found out that we hadn't paid 2019's Human Services grants this year yet, I was I'm feeling really bad for those groups because I know that they were counting on money this year. And so I just kind of wanted to open it up and see if the council wants to try and push through 2019, so it would be half of the biennium Human Services grant this year, or wait and do it all in 2020 is kind of what I'd like to open up for discussion. And I believe that we can do it with the old policy, we just would have to modify the application dates. And my thought was maybe have an application deadline at the end of October and review it in November. Maybe we can have the Finance Administration Committee process it, or an ad hoc committee, but I think that the council can work to try and facilitate getting it paid out this year. In 2018, it was paid out twice, I believe, at least that's what the contract read, that it was paid half in one, in June probably, I'm assuming, and then half towards the end of the year. That's what the contract read. So I just want to open it up for discussion.
Councilmember McHenry.
So I appreciate the point on here about there were no explicit promises made, because that was one thing I was trying to remember during the process. I just want to make sure that that wasn't the case. The only thing that just popped into my head about 2020 is what time in 2020, like what time of year would we be thinking? Because I'm thinking of the next biennium budget, and I don't want to run into that and add more to our plate.
So from the administration perspective, when we originally proposed the new policy that was promised as a result of the change in funding structure, we didn't have dates in there specifically for the purpose of being able to manage our staff workload and timing. Council requested that we add dates in, and our original policy does have dates. So my preference from the administrative side is to, since we are now into budget, end of year, and audit, is to not start the process until the beginning of next year. I have talked with folks at Human Services agencies, and they're completely understanding of the situation of changing policy and what have you. This dollar amount isn't make or break, I think, for most agencies right now. Council can do what it wants, it chooses. However, my preference is to not increase staff workload during the middle of the budget process and audit process and year end. Councilmember Brodnicki.
So in the past, there was like a committee or something to review and do all, I remember it was pretty extensive. So what are we talking about as far as to review candidates who apply, and how much staff time are we talking to do all that?
I have not been part of that process and likely would not be part of this process because I have a lot of planning work that's going on and finance work. And so we would have another staff member do it. But I do remember that there were discussions of, that it did take a couple of meetings by the group that reviewed it. They came up with a recommendation, then they forwarded that. So it would have to be done in a compressed way. If you're going to try and give it out, it'd be really quick.
Okay, so in light of that, and having experienced, going through that process to determine and award the grants, and if they could wait till next year, that would be preferable in our current situation with our lack of staff to do these things. So I'm comfortable with waiting until next year.
Councilmember Lingle.
I would really like to see this money get out the door, quite frankly. And I'd like to see a way that we run an application process that's much more efficient. And I know there's ways to do that, both in government and outside government does do that. And I'm trying to think of how to say this. currently, if we had a very specific thing that we were contracting for with any of these agencies, because they're all individual contracts, in theory, the city could enter into those contracts tomorrow because you have that authority for $10,000, right? If they had a specific thing that we were contracting for. One of the dilemmas here is that we don't have an outcome-specific structure in the city.
Yes, partially. So the grant process that we have is how the city's determined to allocate funds. We did through the 2017 budget, that allocation differently than normal. However, after going through that experience, I would not do it the same way. In our existing grant funding process, they have to show outcomes and show who they've served, how they've served the community. So in that sense, there are outcomes that are required before they get their checks in the existing grant process. But went back when we amended the process years ago, part of, as a council member, Diane may remember this, is we wanted more accountability in the process because at the time, the council did not feel there was enough accountability in determining where the funds went and making sure that they were benefiting the Duval community.
Well, okay, so let's just keep thinking this through a second. I guess I see this process, I mean, I went through I looked at the policy that was put forward before. I mean, this does not have to be this deep staff mega process. This is such an incredibly small amount of money that we should be able to get to a specific outcome or a specific use that we can document without having some massive process. Just the cost of implementing a massive process, the amount of funds we're talking about just don't warrant it, quite frankly. And so I really think we should be able to figure out a way to get this money out the door. And there's a couple of ways we could do it. One way we could do it, we do our grant process, and we make it very clear that we're going to get all the money out the door right after the first of the year. That would be a way we could do it, but we're not going to wait. We're going to start that process now, and we understand that we are going to allocate all that money. I have never heard anybody on council suggest we were going to reduce this amount of money. If anything, we should be increasing this amount of money. So I think we should be able to come up with a fast-track way to get this money out into our neighborhood. And given that we're already deep into 2019, my guess is those agencies have already more than outperformed relative to the amount of money that we're going to give them. I mean, how many agencies did we fund before? 4?
It depended on the year. In this particular case, going through the budget process, we as a collective body agreed to focus on the bookends of society, the children and the seniors.
Right.
Which is why part of the reason why we had to update the grant policy to begin with. In the process, to be clear, the process that exists now is not overly burdensome. What the time-consuming thing is getting the documents ready, getting them out, getting them publicized from the staff side. The review part is actually simple. Councilmember Rudnicki and then Councilmember Napland.
So in the past, when we did do this, when you put out there to the community that there is money available, a lot of folks do show up. And I do recall the one time, I think we had over 8 agencies, and to review all that, prior to all that, you have to get all that paperwork and announcement, and then sitting there and reviewing and reading through, and you are not just reading through a request, but you're also having to go through their financial statements. And what I discovered in that process was, and why we want to have something a little more stringent was because there were certain agencies that were applying that there was a big question about handing over $2,000, $3,000 to that agency, and really, was that going to be a benefit for the community when you looked at all of the paperwork that came in? And so it took more than one meeting to sit there and really review and go through that and have a discussion. And that's what I'm talking about, is in regards to staff time, council time, whoever sits on the committee to make those decisions. So it's not as, I would say, as easy to make that decision. It's not something you can just quickly, oh, let's decide, because it has to be very fair. And the fairness part of it is very important, I think, for the community. So that's just my experience.
Councilmember Naplin.
I appreciate you sharing how much work it was, because that's important to know. I agree, streamlining the process is as much as we can, even though there will be work, because we want to make sure we give it to groups that are utilizing the money appropriately, so that due diligence is good. But, so my concern is that the draft that we were presented with last council meeting said the applications would be due in October, and then it'd be reviewed before the end of the year, something like that. So if we don't do it this year, my concern is that currently the plan would be to not even start working on it until October, and then when we would be paying out, so that would be, I just don't appreciate it. And so the fact that we didn't get another draft with the updates that were requested today, it feels like, when is this ever going to happen? So I share the frustration
Ms.
of
Thomas,
trying to
then.
understand the timing of when we would get this done.
So just to give an update, and we actually updated Councilmember Ho, because she had that question as well. So we have made a lot of those adjustments, had it ready to go, and we sent it to our attorney, and they had some comments, and we didn't get those in until after we had to have the packet go. So that's the reason why it didn't land again this time. And we talked to, like I said, about, Councilor Hole about it. But we are prepared to move it forward at the next meeting. It's just that it was not ready because we weren't able to make the changes that we received from our attorney. It happened like at the end of last week.
And to
So-
remind the body, the October deadline was put in because the original policy that we brought forth did not have a date, and council requested a date, and at the time it was brought forth, that was a reasonable timeframe.
And I just want to help us try to get to a pathway. So one of the things too is, because we ended up talking to our attorney today as well, because we have an existing policy, that policy is an audit policy. So if we don't follow that policy, then what we need to do is create a record and show our work that we're not going to use that policy, and we're going to go with an abbreviated streamline pathway forward. So you have to create a record, because you have an existing policy that says you're going to do it this way, and if we're not going to use that before the new policy is adopted, then you have to create a record here.
Councilmember Iyer and then Mayor Pro Tem Remington.
I definitely, share the concerns of the council member, and I would imagine that the mayor is, obviously, and staff are also concerned. This is a concern, but there's obviously other issues taking up time. I would propose that we just set a time frame, kind of a council deadline that we hold in terms of that we want the ability to start this process by the beginning of next year, or some reasonable time in the beginning of next year, in the first month or two, and then we just, take that accelerated process if things don't work out, and I think that's reasonable, that we just say, hey, okay, we weren't able to get this policy change together, let's do this more fast-track process, some place in between how the money was allocated in 2017 and 18, and the future best process. So I think that's a reasonable, I want to get this done, but I also want to respect the mayor's concerns and staff's concerns about timeframe of the process. So that's what I'd like to see, but I think we can always, pull the plug if the beginning of next year if we don't see something happen. And there's one more point I was going to make, and now I've forgotten. So with that, I'll.
Mayor Pro Tem Remington.
I really support trying to get the money out this year, but I understand the logistical challenges in doing that. So if the only answer is that we wind up waiting till early in the year, I really support what Matt was saying, so that we would have the opportunity to get that money out and get it to good use. But I do have a question, and it probably falls on, needs a legal answer. We had a process in the past, and we've given out money. Is it possible to say we're going to extend that last process to this year's money and just simply divide that money between those that applied in that process and say that's what we're going to use? Now, it's a legal question.
Okay, I
I don't
will
know if that's
answer that. We did not follow our process last year.
And the reason why the process wasn't followed is we were, as a council, when we were on council, we were provided with information that told us that what we were doing was okay. There became some hiccups in the process moving forward. In fact, one of the organizations that was allocated money never actually took the money because of the requirements that were going to be put on them. So what we found is it actually took a lot more time to not follow a process than to follow the process in place. And especially with the justification, the calls to the auditor's office, legal, et cetera, it made it much more challenging to simply directly allocate. And besides, from my perspective, having been on both sides, the direct allocation, while it can seem simpler, it does take away some level of transparency and ability for other nonprofits to compete for the money. So it can provide an air of favoritism that is probably not good for a small city with the limited resources we do have. But that's just my experience and putting it out there for consideration. Councilmember Langle.
Here's something I think we can do and still have process. One of the things I think we can do is we can go out to the agencies and ask them for a letter of interest and require that they give us their financial statements right now. Because, believe me, I mean, it doesn't commit us to anything. We want to know approximately what they're looking for, and we want to know what their financial status is. Because if they aren't a going concern, we shouldn't fund them anyway. And that is a very easy thing to determine. I mean, literally, you can blow through 8 agencies on GuideStar in an hour and see exactly what their status is. And that would at least give us some idea of who's interested, how much they want, and what their financial status is. And that at least gets us ahead of the process, you're going to want that stuff anyway. It doesn't commit anybody, but it gives us a chance to at least review their status and see if, they're going to be competitive.
Councilmember McHenry.
I was just wondering if there's a way to split the difference here a bit, because I heard one concern of if we don't distribute some money now, that going to next year, we're looking at, I think as the date picked was October 31st, or the end of October, right, was the deadline for the grants?
And that can easily be changed.
Well, that's
in
what I was
policy,
thinking, if we
because
picked a date
That's why
and-
there wasn't a date in the original policy,
Right.
is to avoid exactly that issue.
So if we picked a date in April or something sooner, I mean, then we're not waiting quite as long, and we would have time to finish the policy properly. I don't know if that makes a difference to anyone.
Councilmember Hoag.
As far as dates, I thought the old policy did have a date in it of December 15th for applications, so I'd rather have applications in this year, whether we make a decision on them later. If we waited till April, by that time, we really need to kind of have some sort of idea what we're going to do this year, I think. And as far as the bookends go, I don't remember there being like a, a budget note regarding bookends, and I don't remember there being a consensus with council regarding bookends. So I feel very strongly that I don't think bookends is the answer, and I've heard from some constituents along those lines too, that they feel like it needs to include all, that there is a need in between as well. And another thing to note, I just want to make sure that the council and the public knows that currently the city of Duval is giving 0.08% of our General fund, 0.08. Other cities around us, I've seen statistics, give 0.5 to 1.42. We're the lowest, 0.08%. So really, we need to be giving closer to like $110,000 in a year or $130,000 in a year. This is something I think we need to have a discussion about in future budgets, but just want to make sure you guys all know
I
that.
agree that we should be giving more.
Can I ask for a little bit of clarification? Because I think we have a pathway. So we could begin the process of allocating the $19 under a process where the applications are due December 15th, go through that, finish the policy that we're working on, so 2 different pathways, and then start that process. They might be somewhat back-to-back, but that would be okay, because you're probably going to be starting the other one in February or March of next year. We'll probably have just allocated potentially the $19. If the application deadline is 2009 or December 15th, we wouldn't be able to allocate them by the end of the year because we don't have enough time to get to council. So is that what is, I don't know, do we want to get some consensus on that?
Councilmember Iyer.
I would say that if we're going to put out there, passively collect these applications by the 15th of December, I would say we'd consider just allocating all the money at that time, because you're going to go through the whole process anyway. And I mean, I definitely would like to be sympathetic to time constraints, but I mean, if we can collect these applications, with minimal amount of work and passive process, and they can sit and wait for review at the beginning of the year, I mean, I guess I would defer to staff on the level of effort that would take, and is that a reasonable or unreasonable thing at this time? Is it going to be achievable?
It's just sending out a notice to our partners, making sure that we have the application and the criteria. And I'm not sure if that is something that's changing as part of the policy. I'm just stepping in to help out on this policy.
I think if we want to set a December 15th deadline, even if we're planning on using the full budgeted amount for the process, I think the biggest question for me anyway is going to be, are we planning to use the 2019 or the current policy for that process? And if so, we can advertise, when we get our ducks in a row, we can advertise probably within the next 2 weeks and have those applications due December 15th, which would give people 2 months essentially, or a month, 2 months? 2 months to get their applications and all their paperwork together. But on the flip side of that, if we want to use the new revised policy that we are still working on, I'm not sure that we would necessarily have enough time to get through all the revisions and edits and everything that we want to have these robust discussions on. I don't know if we were going to have enough time to get that approved through council in time to advertise, to give them enough time for the 15th of December. Does that am I making sense? Okay.
So I have somewhat of an answer. So we have an application. It looks pretty easy. You gave it to me. Thank you today. I appreciate that. And it's applicant name, organization, the representative, funding amount requested, purpose of requested funding, describe your organization, and other support. So it's pretty simple. So I think that would be enough for somebody to come in and apply for it. And if you want to have it under your old policy or new policy, we can figure that out, but at least we can start to get this part moving.
Councilmember Napland.
So I don't know if you need a motion or not, but I completely agree with Councilmember Iyer that the old policy is really not substantially different than the new policy, and I can't see doing the process back to back. It's such a similar process. It's almost exactly the same, that I would consider dispersing both the 19 and 20 money based on the process that we start December 15th, that get dispersed early next year, maybe in 2 pieces, and just use the old policy. There really is not that much difference to it. And if going through that process, we might discover other ways to streamline it that would inform our policymaking. And I agree also with Councilmember Hoag. I don't recall any discussion about bookends. I remember it being mentioned several times, but I don't think it was a discussion that council had or a decision that council had. And I don't remember council requesting even a policy update at any point that I know of. And I think there are some changes that could be useful in the policy, but I don't think they're necessary to utilize and to move forward.
Councilmember Hoag, and then Councilmember Iyer.
I agree. And the old policy does not cover bookends. It covers everyone. So it makes me happy. So just so you know, the verbiage in there is good. So
Councilmember Iyer.
To be fair, I expressed, my memory is getting poorer every day, but I believe I expressed, concern of having the policy of doing something, so that, I wouldn't want to say that we didn't have any consensus on wanting to look at that policy or use the policy. So, I think that was some part of a discussion. So I just want to get that. And I like the idea of having some date in this thing, because it keeps us, having the expectation that the agency knows that they need to put an application in at a given date is, I think, a decent thing. At this point, for the interest of moving the discussion along, and for maybe to, after hearing the feelings of other council members, I am supportive of using the current policy and distributing through that process, collecting applications on the 15th, letting it sit. We can, and then the beginning of next year, review the applications to try to minimize impact to the staff, and then use that time to learn from the process and have that inform the updates, and just and to cap it all off, I just generally want to express my appreciation for all the mayor's efforts to bring things up to date and, really make a concerted effort to improve processes. And I think it's very much needed. And I think we've just been stricken by some difficult times that have, led us to situations that, have been, it's just hard to get too many steps ahead. And so, I don't want it to be any sort of slight on the efforts of staff and the administration. They've been doing a great job in terms of making things make sense and doing the right process, doing right by the citizens. But I think this is just a case where we might, to some extent, just throw our hands up a little bit and then move forward.
Councilmember Brodnicki, and then McHenry.
So I guess I need a little more clarity here of exactly what are we doing? Because if the idea is to initiate moving right now on this policy to open it up for people to apply, because I can guarantee you it is a time-consuming thing, then wouldn't we want to make a decision like now? Which council members might sit on the committee to start working right away on that process? Because it's not only the process of setting all that up to the public, but it's also then to review, which can take a few meetings. And then from my experience, when the proposals come in, because especially if there's not enough time, I've discovered with the agencies that a lot of them, the way they write their proposals really is, they don't fulfill all the criteria, let's put it that way. And then it becomes more difficult to try to make a decision, because you may like this agency and what they're talking about, but you just need more information. This requires more deep diving for them, more paperwork from them. And so when I did work on this committee, it was a few months. I want to say like 3 or 4 months for me. It was a long time frame.
Depending on the year, definitely in those bigger funding years, it took a significant amount of time.
Yeah, so if what we're saying is we want to start right now and then pay in the new year, then I think that council members who want to be on that committee should make a decision like we have to make it now.
Councilmember McHenry.
It's funny you mentioned that. That's what I was thinking, and I was going to say I'd be happy to serve on that. I didn't know if it'd be some sort of ad hoc committee. Also, for clarification, I wanted to know, so our current policy right now, I know there was some mention of legality or if things were done the right way. So our current policy right now is okay to use,
Our current policy is fine. It's
Okay.
how it was allocated for the 2018 budget
Okay,
that
got
creates
it.
some concern or issues, because while I know the city we took formal action as a council in the budget, it definitely mucked some things up, which was not good in the long run.
well, I do like the idea of the December 15th, as a few others have said. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we had what we needed now to not put a huge load on staff to try and finish up the changes we're talking about. I mean, are we in a place that we could do that and then reevaluate next year and change it a little more or something along those lines?
The policy is almost done. There were suggested changes from council from the last couple of meetings. Those have been run through the attorneys. The attorneys have additional comments, like to Ms. Thomas's point, that we just were not able to get that work done before this meeting. So as Ms. Thomas's point, the policy should be ready for final review for the next meeting, and the new policy could be implemented. I would ask staff to go back and double check if council wants to move forward with funding both years through the December 15th process that it currently exists, to make sure that our existing policy allows us to fund 2 years at once, because that was another impetus for the policy update, was the fact that we were moving to a biennium budget instead of an annual budget. And all of our policies have been based on that. Councilmember Lingle.
Well, it seems to me, if we can reprogram money for all kinds of other things, reprogramming $10,000 to get that money out the door in entirety in 2020, or 2020, should be very achievable, because if nothing else, we can do a resolution along with adopting a new policy or not that authorizes us to do that. I mean, that's the value of being the council, right? We control the purse strings, and if we want that money out the door, we should be able to do it regardless of whichever policy ultimately we choose to use. And I just know from working with social service agencies, even if everything seems great, you get to the end of the year and times get tough. And it takes a while to get your next year's allocations from the county or whoever. And so I really think we should just get the money out the door, pick a policy you want to use. But if we have to do a separate resolution that authorizes using the full 20,000, then I say we do it. I've never heard one council member say they wanted to cut that amount of money.
Can I help?
Yes, you can.
So I don't see an issue of the 1920 money, because you're not going to have applications come in until December. We'll hold them until we bring them in January for whatever the committee is. I would say, though, that if we're going to send out an application, that you have to we have to say what policy those organizations are going to be applied to. And so it's either going to be our existing policy or our new policy. And if we're trying to get something out, because if they're due in December, you want to give 30 days, essentially 30-day notice. That's pretty common. So that's a decision point. If you want to use the existing policy, then we can actually get this going, get the application out and routed. But if you want to use a new policy, then we're going to need for sure to bring it back the next time and just make sure that we have it pretty quick. Because the one thing you have to be careful is equal protection. And so you want to make sure that if you're going to send out a note says, please apply, that they know what that criteria is. And so it has to be either the policy that we have or the policy that we're going to finish and create.
Councilmember Hoag.
So I made a mistake. The policy that had the December dates and January dates was the old policy that's no longer there. So the one that we have,
We still have a policy in place.
yes, but this one has an October 31st
That's the one we
deadline.
haven't adopted yet, though.
Correct.
That's not in place.
Oh,
It's resolution 09, whatever, in your last packet.
so what is the date on, do you know what the date is then for sure on the one from '09?
Do you have that one?
Oh, okay.
He is so on top of this. Thank you.
You did, you left it on my
January
desk.
15th.
And I looked at it.
So this one
Councilmember
says
Iyer?
January 15th.
I know,
Okay, not December.
Councilmember Iyer.
yes.
To just to, again, to move the discussion along, I just think for simplicity, just use the old policy.
Councilmember McHenry.
I'm okay using the old policy, but it was one thought I had, if this could come back in the edited form at the next meeting, if that's even possible, and we could try, and if we can't come to an agreement on it, then use the old policy, just to keep things moving and follow that timeline.
Councilmember Napling.
This is just super quick. The only reason I would say just use the old policy is when I've looked at both side by side, there really aren't substantial differences between them. And so I think, as I had mentioned before, and Councilmember Iyer, I think, echoed, that we could learn from the process of doing it under the old policy. And the new policy, like I said, that's proposed is really not different in how it's done. There's a few tweaks, but in general, I would actually prefer to just use the existing policy and not spend more staff time trying to get it revised, go through it with the old policy. We might learn something. That's my preference. But I see what you're saying, too.
All right. We have a recommendation to move forward with the existing policy, which Councilmember Hoag, I believe you just found that the application date's January 15th, which is feasible for staff without bumping into our budget and end-of-year issues. So is there consensus to move forward with the old policy and continue looking at the new policy until we have consensus? I'm seeing all head nods. Okay, perfect. We will go that route then. All right, moving on to unfinished business, Agenda Bill 19-66, approve resolution forwarding CPA 19-001, an amendment to the future land use map of the city's 2015 comprehensive plan is set forth in the comprehensive plan amendment CPA 19-001 to the city's 2020 docket for consideration. This is for discussion and/or decision.
You want me to give a brief update? Yes. Okay, thank you. Again, for the record, Laura Thomas, Community Development Department. So every year, we do a docket of our comprehensive plan, and this year we only had one item on that docket, and that was because we were doing an abbreviated process because we changed our timelines and our timeframes of when we do docketing and when we go through our approval. And we looked at the future land use map change of what's known as the rec center, so you'll see a photo up there of it. This was a carryover from the 2018 docket, and it's been carried over because the city's been considering whether or not it's going to rezone it, potentially sell it, or all of the above. And so what staff recommended, because we have not yet made that decision, is to carry it over into the 2020 docket, which we've applied for, and that docket will be coming forward to you soon. But just for those members in the audience that aren't at all of our meetings, this is our proposed future land use map. They're known as flumes. It's currently zoned public facilities, and we are considering rezoning that property R8. And when you look at what the uses are within the zoning code, you can see that public facilities obviously are more of like that government type facility, versus R8 uses are considered residential uses. And you can have conditional uses within that zone for government purposes, but you don't always see that. It's not typical. We looked at, obviously, the neighboring development. We looked at an older appraisal. Obviously, we would want an updated appraisal as we move forward. But where are we at tonight? We finished the public hearing process in front of both Planning Commission and Council. Planning Commission made their recommendation at their last meeting, which was on 9/25. So the recommendation by our Planning Commission and our staff is that we move it towards, move it to the 2020 docket. Are there any remaining questions?
Seeing no, oh, Councilmember Iyer.
I'm sorry, this is, by passing this, we're approving moving CPA 1901 to the 2020 docket.
Correct.
We're not doing anything to this,
Nope.
okay, so
Correct. Thank you.
move that we approve AB 1966.
Do we have a second? Any further discussion? Councilmember, or, sorry, Mayor Pro Tem Remington.
Just a quick way. So we've changed our docket process.
Yes.
So when would this come before council if we approve it?
So we will bring our docket to Planning Commission in November and to council in December for action.
So
That's to docket it. So remember, the docket isn't approving anything. It's bringing forward all of the different potential things that we see within potentially public works, like if we're updating some plans. We do a lot of adoption incorporation by reference, but we do have a lot of goals and policy work that are within there, and sometimes those need to get updated when we're updating, say, a water comp plan. It's pretty standard. We're like kind of in between that process before we head into the census and do our next really large community outreach and comprehensive plan update. But we do have a couple of docket items that we're preparing right now for Planning Commission.
So we're moving it to 2020.
Correct.
And so when would this decision be made in 2020?
July.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. Motion passes. Moving on to Agenda Bill AB 19-67, approve resolution declaring certain items surplus for discussion and/or decision. Mr. Lenashevsky. Or if folks are ready to move forward, we'll entertain a motion as well.
I move that we approve AB 1967, approve resolution declaring certain items surplus.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. Motion passes. All right, Agenda Bill 19-60, Contract 2019 Asphalt Repair for discussion and/or decision. Mr. Lenashevsky.
Good evening, Mayor and Council again, and remaining citizens and staff. Steve Lenashevsky, Public Works. So no action at this time, but want to bring forward the most recent quote for services, the 2019 asphalt repair project. We did have 3 bidders. We are going through the qualifying process at this time. A little bit of a wide range, 68,000 and change up to 103. Some of the questions I did have on this more so relate to maybe proximity and process, and maybe explaining kind of the city's change process. You'll note page 72 of the packet, which is the first image you have of the breakdown of images. There's a lot of them on the Safeway property proper. So prior to my arrival here, commercial sites, the utilities within them are public. This did not have any agreement or any sort of association that, they have a management corporation for their property, right? So it was not directed to them through this development process that they would manage the surface. So we own the utility, we have easement to own and operate the utility. There's no agreement where they would take care of the surfacing. So when the surface degrades, maybe because of poor installation or whatever it might be, in this case, we're responsible for that, right? So if our utilities are exposed, they can be damaged, that is more costly. So it is quite a large bit of work on private property. New processes, we give those tasks over to those management groups for those entities. Because the Safeway pad, believe it or not, has a Safeway store and then the little parcels next to it, and then you have the other corner, you have the bank, so there's 6 separate facilities on there. They're owned and managed by 2 separate agencies. The Bank of America owns their piece, and then some sort of conglomerate manages the other part of the site. So with that said too, another interesting tidbit on page 2, the mobile home park, same thing, kind of private property where the city owns and operates the utility underneath. It's a very costly system for us based on how it was installed, when it was installed, and maybe the premise that the city wasn't available to inspect 20-plus years ago when it was installed. We take, utility installation very seriously. We have inspections routinely for all things that go in, and I would imagine this one probably didn't get that because we're up there at least once a month fixing a water leak in the system. So it is a very costly site, and it is on private property, but it's our utility to maintain. And then the rest of the items are scattered through about, the city's remaining right away. So that's kind of some interesting, maybe you didn't want to know, but now you know kind of things on it. I don't have a lot to say about the bidders yet. This is Alana's project, and she is out on vacation, and with the kind of wide array of talents who did bid on this project, we want to make sure we qualify the right agency. And I wouldn't be surprised if somebody didn't qualify. So we'll be back next meeting. Any questions on the item? Yes, sir.
It seems unusual that we would do anything on private property. Is that something that happened in the past? That's the way it is, but today that wouldn't happen. So if Safeway were building, the utility would, we manage what's in the right of way as soon as it hits private property, whether it's storm drains or water or sewer, it's up to them to maintain them, service them, repair them. But in this case, that was just never agreed to in the past.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not quite, so kind of. So it is ours, even if it is under private property, but we have covenants that are recorded that they are responsible, right? Managing the surface, taking care of the surface, taking care of the appurtenances. The one question, which was a good one, if they, they're not managing their asphalt well, it's still ours in this case, but if they plow with a private plow agency during the winter and they break something and we know it, we make them fix it. So there are things we do watch, but again, just this basic degradation of a poor surface is unfortunately our exposure to our utility that we need to care for. It's going to look kind of weird because Safeway's parking lot, no offense, I'm not sure if anybody works for Safeway in the room, but it's kind of falling apart, right? So that's just how that one is. But yes, the new, just like conditions, CC&Rs in a subdivision, we have those type of documents for managing private sites commercially.
Councilmember Iyer.
Just to be clear, it is common for cities to own this size of sewer in a private parking lot, and just not the surface, not the road surface.
Right. Any other questions or discussion?
Sorry.
Councilmember
I just
Iyer.
have a couple questions about the budget things, but I'm going to email them to you and we can discuss them offline and prepare in preparation for the next meeting.
Right. So this will be coming back to the October 15th meeting. So we have nothing left on the agenda, so if there are no objections, we are adjourned at 8:48.